on a good day when he and Bill Cosby would be doing banter on I Spy, which was they were writing, and so when he would call me, sometimes he would call and there'd be this serious voice and he'd say, "Hi, Mark, it's Robert." And I'd say, "Okay, this is going to be a serious talk." And a couple of days later, the phone would ring and I'd say, "Hello," and he'd say, "Hey, Mark, it's Bob." And it was like, "Oh, this is going to be a fun conversation." So there were two sides of his personality, which is the case a lot of times with actors. And but while one side was more fun and more responsive, both sides had equal good ethics and good intent. And he was a perfectionist. He did his best work every time out, no matter what it was. And so I have great respect for him.
I will say this in one message, and then we'll get into Star Trek. He did tell me that, Kelly Robinson was him. It was him, flawed, with all his flaws.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And if since you know the show, I mean, there were quite a few episodes that were dark, that weren't buddy concept, buddy genre, kind of light and banter and everything else. They did their share of very moody, dark episodes, and we saw Kelly Robinson get down there into the dark area on quite a few occasions. And so, you saw both sides of Bob Cope in that show, and he revealed himself.
Oh, yeah.
Quite often would write those scripts. He would write the scripts that were the most poignant. So he revealed himself in that show. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, I miss it. Now, getting into Star Trek, the original one, who's the one who picked like Shatner and all these people, and Leonard Nimoy to be on the show?
Roddenberry. And here's the funny thing: the guy they wanted right from the beginning was Leonard Nimoy and Bill Shatner. And Leonard Nimoy had been a guest star on The Lieutenant, which was the series that Gene Roddenberry created and produced right before Star Trek. And he met a lot of his Star Trek writers and directors and actors doing that show. And Leonard Nimoy had been a guest star. And Gene told me this, but I also was told this by Gary Lockwood of 2001, and he was in the second pilot. And he told me he was over at Gene's house, and Gene was saying, I've come up with this character, and he's very serious, and I want him to look a little bit kind of alien, his bone structure, and I'm trying to think of who it is. And Gary said, Gene, it's that guy, because Gary was the star of The Lieutenant. And Gary said, Gene, it's that guy was in one of the episodes. And he his name was Lenny or something, and Roddenberry looked at him and said, Leonard Nimoy. Boom. And from that point on, he knew that's who he wanted. Well, the same thing with Shatner. Shatner, the three hottest actors in television in the late 50s and the early 60s that everybody wanted to get for a series was Bob Cope, William Shatner, and Jack Lord. There were other great actors who came out of television, too. Paul Newman, Robert Redford, James Dean. But they went into the movies pretty quickly. But these three were on television a lot. They would get the best guest starring roles, and everybody was offering series to them. Shatner had been offered The Defenders, and he turned it down. So Robert Reed got it from the Brady Bunch later, the dad. Uh-huh. He got The Defenders with E.G. Marshall. And Shatner was offered a couple other series he turned down. Bob Cope was offered Man from U.N.C.L.E. Jack Lord was offered Man from U.N.C.L.E. They both turned it down, so Robert Vaughn got it and made a star out of him and so on. So Shatner, they wanted Shatner, but he was doing another series. He was doing a series called For the People, where he played a DA.
I remember that.
And it only lasted 13 weeks. Nobody remembers it. It was on CBS. It was on Sunday nights. And it was up against Bonanza, and it got killed. But he was committed to that show when they were doing the first Star Trek pilot. So Roddenberry couldn't get Shatner, so he got Jeffrey Hunter, who was a movie star, but he had come over and done a show called Temple Houston. And they looked a little alike, the same type, square-jawed, leading man, light brown hair, good physique, the whole bit. So he got Jeffrey Hunter, and they did the first pilot, The Cage, and NBC turned it down because it was too cerebral, and they wanted Star Trek to be more action-adventure-oriented. So for the first time in the history of television, the network ordered a second pilot. And I'll have to tell you something about that in a moment, but we'll stick with Shatner right at the moment. And so Shatner's show was still on. It was in production. It was about to be canceled, but nobody knew that. So the first person they went to was the other guy. The three guys were Bob Culp, William Shatner, and Jack Lord. They went to Jack Lord, and Jack Lord agreed to be Captain Kirk. And but he wanted 25% ownership of the show, and because he had 25% in his previous series called Stony Burke, and he ended up getting 25% of Hawaii Five-0 as well. And Shatner went to Dorothy Fontana, and Dorothy told me this story. It's great. She was his secretary, Gene's secretary, and he came in and he said, she said, "So do we have Jack?" And he said, No, we're not going to go with him. He takes his name a little too seriously." And he wasn't referring to Jack. So Jack Lord was not Captain Kirk. And he asked Lloyd Bridges, who had just come off the Sea Hunt, and Lloyd Bridges said, "I don't want to do a science fiction." And so they were trying to think, who can we get? And right at that moment, they picked up Daily Variety and saw that For the People had just gotten the axe. And so Roddenberry called Shatner and said, "I want you to be in this show." Shatner came out and sat and watched the first pilot with Jeffrey Hunter, and he said, "Done, I'll do it. But I'd like to play the captain a little differently. This guy's a little too thoughtful, a little too serious. I think the captain should be a little more Errol Flynnish. I think he should be a very ambitious man who has faults, that's married to his ship, and he's the type of guy you would follow up. He could lead a charge up a mountain, but if anything threatens his command, if anything does that, you don't want to be in his way." Wow. That type of a character. And Roddenberry loved it. Roddenberry was a former Air Force captain who flew bombing missions during World War II.
Oh, wow.
And he was a former Los Angeles police officer who rose to the rank of sergeant before he started writing for television. And so Roddenberry immediately locked into that and said, "That's the captain I want," kind of like Horatio Hornblower. Yeah. And so that's how Captain Kirk got into that show. But he was the first one they went to, but he wasn't available. And after going through Hunter and almost having Jack Lord, it came back to Shatner.
Well, that was the best move, because I'll be honest with you, Jack Lord would not have made a good captain. And, no. I hate Bridges again, would not have made it. I think he was typecast, with, Sea Hunt, which I don't even know how that survived on TV. But anyway, and I'm not knocking it, but I'm just saying I never could get into it. But both those people would not have been able to play the captain. I mean, you have to look at, Shatner was a damn good looking guy. I mean, and very popular compared to the other two guys, which I'm not saying they were good looking. They, I guess they're typical, male, but Shatner had the looks that, I think it attracted a big, women, to watch the show. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Oh yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And it's funny because they ended up where they were supposed to go. I mean, Jack Lord, I don't think would have been anywhere near as good in that show. I don't think the show would have lasted. If Jeffrey Hunter had come back, I don't think it would have lasted. It wouldn't be what it is today. You needed the right cast in there. But Jack Lord was destined to be Steve McGarrett, and that show went for 12 seasons. So he ended up going where he was meant to go, and Shatner ended up going where he was meant to go. And it just sometimes fate works that way. It looks like it's not going to happen, and it comes together. And like Hawaii Five-0, it was going to be Richard Boone, and then this network decided he was getting too old, and they didn't want him, but he was living in Hawaii, so they were at first they were talking to him, and then the producer Leonard Freeman said, "No, I want Robert Brown." Bob Brown of Here Comes the Bride, who we mentioned before. So they put him under contract. They took him out to Hawaii. Leonard Freeman called Perry Lafferty at CBS and said, "It's not working. He's not right." And CBS said, "We just signed a contract with Jack Lord to do a Western. We would rather see him in this." And they sent Jack Lord the script, and they were just a week away from filming. And they sent him the script. He got halfway through the script, and he turned to his wife and said, "How do you feel about living in Hawaii?" Boom! He was on a plane out 2 days later, And 2 days after that, he was in front of the camera. So, sometimes it works that way. Sometimes it doesn't, which is we never know about because those are the shows that don't make it. But if you look at the great shows in TV history, like Carol O'Connor and All in the Family and things like that, it's like fate lends a hand and puts you there. And it's like the Beatles again. Lennon and McCartney ran into each other in a schoolyard in Liverpool. And if one of them had been left the classroom 1 minute earlier or 1 minute later, they wouldn't have met. And so sometimes, you've got to wonder what moves us around on this planet because, things happen that are really not in our control, and we're just in the right place at the right time, or tragically the wrong place at the wrong time.
Oh, yeah.
But this is one of those right times and right places for these guys, and for Shatner in particular. And I think that's without that cast, without Nimoy, without Shatner, the others maybe, the show probably would have done fine, but they were all great. But those two in particular, you would not have Star Trek today. It would not have lasted this long.
No, I don't think we would have had the Next Generation, then the reboot of Star Trek. I'm wondering how the new one is going to be Picard. I am really anxious on that. Now, one thing about Shatner too, rumor was after Star Trek was canceled, he ended up living in his car for a while.
Yeah, his camper.
Yeah.
Well, here's what happened. He and Gene Roddenberry both got divorces while Star Trek was in production. And so they're both making really good money for its day, for its time. Now it's a laughable amount of money. Shatner was getting $5,000 an episode, plus royalties. You get the first time it's reruns, you get a $2,500, and the next time it's reruns, you get $1,250, and the next time, it goes down halfway each time. But he also had 5% ownership in the show. Jack Lord wanted 25. Shatner asked for 5, so he got it. And so, he's making good money for that time. That's like $50,000 a week. And he gets divorced. And so the settlement is based on his income. And he had 3 daughters, too, that he had to support. So he's paying child support, he's paying alimony, he had to move out of the house, his wife gets to keep that. So he's living in his camper because the show just got canceled, and suddenly he doesn't even have a check coming in. So he's doing guest star spots, but every dime he's making is going towards alimony and child support.
Oh, wow.
So he's supporting a really nice home, but he's living in his camper. Same thing's happening to Gene Roddenberry at the same time. He gets divorced, and he's got 2 daughters. And so it's, they both kind of suddenly were on hard times. And working, Shatner was all over the dial. He was taking guest star spots everywhere, probably more than he should have, but he needed to make the money, and he was off doing summer stock through Connecticut and so forth, living in his camper. As Star Trek is now going into reruns all across America, and he's becoming more and more famous and more tied to that character, and he's living in a camper. It's just remarkable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people didn't know that. I didn't even know all that. I just, doing internet research, it said after it was canceled, he was living in his car. So, I just got, wow.
Yeah. And you can't believe half of what you read on the internet, but that happens to be true. And so, that was for about a year. But he was getting so many guest star roles and getting paid decent money for them. Back then, you'd get about $2,500 for a guest star spot. That was like, or maybe $3,000 would be top pay. But he was doing that every few weeks. He was getting something and doing the summer stock, and so he got back on his feet. And then Star Trek came back.